and we can start admitting. Okay, I'm going to spotlight you now, Elizabeth, and then when it hits 2 o'clock, we're ready to go.
Thank you, Deb. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Lanyon, the independent panel chair of the Retirement Living Code of Conduct, and this is the webinar on declining mental acuity. Before I start, I would like to give you join me in an acknowledgement of in the spirit of reconciliation. The Property Council of Australia and all of us acknowledge the traditional custodians of country in Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. Welcome everybody to the briefing. We've been overwhelmed by the support and see that it's a very interesting topic. So we're exploring declining mental acuity and the issues arising. Today there are over 300, perhaps nearly 400 viewing the briefing. The event is on Teams and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions after the presentations. And so I suggest that after we get to the Q&A and while we're going along, please place any questions that you want to ask the presenters, put them in the chat. And I'd also like to say that as well as our presenters from Dementia Australia and from Aveo, we have, I have Craig Bennett, who's a panel member representing residents, and also a resident of a retirement village himself and the president of the New South Wales Residents Association. So he's going to help me in quizzing the presenters. Let's start with me introducing Garry Walters from Dementia Australia. So dementia prevalence is forecast to double in the next 2 decades. It's an unescapable concern that impacts on the whole of the community, industry, and especially retirement living. As the national peak body, Dementia Australia has a range of resources and strategies to assist retirement living prepare for potential changing service demands of dementia-related acuity decline. Now, we're very fortunate to have Garry to speak to us. He's the Business Solutions Consultant, and his role is to assist organisations address the connection between dementia education, staff capacity, resident satisfaction, and brand strategy. Thank you, Garry.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to everybody who are putting in the time today on a Friday afternoon to listen to this topic. It's never an easy topic to talk about, and particularly sometimes people ask me, why are you having a smile on your face when you talk about this topic? And it's not because I think there's anything funny in the insidious nature of the conditions that people face with dementia. It's because when I have this opportunity to talk to so many people, I know that there's over 400,000 people now, and there's going to be over 800,000 people in a couple of decades' time who will appreciate us putting in the effort to talk about this. It's so important. So that's where I see the positivity, in that we're actually doing something, we're taking steps, and we're moving forward. So thank you. Moving to the next slide. Is that something that I'm going to control, or maybe it is? So I won't go into a whole lot of detail. 15 minutes is not long enough to talk about all the important topics we could talk about with dementia and declining acuity, but some retirement living pain points that let's just recap. Dementia in retirement living is inescapable. Point to note, I'm never going to use the word inescapable in a presentation ever again. I've said it 15 times differently each time, so I apologise for using that word. I won't again. 30% of people over the age of 85, 10% of people over 65 will develop dementia. 2 in 3 people living with dementia are living in community. That's your communities. That's why it's inescapable. 41,000 people with young onset by 2054. A lot of people heading into retirement, the glory years, supposed to be enjoying life, being the providers for their family, still potentially being providers for their family. The narrative is switched. They're now dependent on their family. A lot of turmoil for family, friends, and all sorts of stakeholders. Strategic conflict for you guys in retirement living. We're not here to tell you that you have to become carers, that you have to change the structure of your business. That's totally up to you. That's not what this advice is about. Resident and staff misunderstanding and pressure. That's one of the big ones that we can help with. External stakeholder pressure. That's family and friends coming in, telling you how to run your business, how to serve their family members, because they potentially might know best. But if there's dementia involved, maybe they don't anymore. Legal obligations and limitations. We're not here to advise on that. We know you've got a minefield to work through in this topic as you change your businesses to address this burgeoning need on society. Elder abuse, financial elder abuse, some things that we can help with there. Hot topics that cannot be ignored. And of course, the big one, stigma and discrimination. That's the starting point that we would really like to address as fast as possible if we could. 3 out of 4 people living with dementia say people don't keep in touch with them. 65% say people have been avoiding them. 71% of family members, friends or carers say they've been excluded from family activities. 81% of people in the public are treated differently. We know that. We need to address that. How do we address that? That's the tricky part. That's where there's the complexities come into it in terms of culture, background, how you can organise your facilities around this topic. So that's where we think we can help the most and the fastest. We could talk about an ideal approach, strategic direction, identify gaps, environmental audits, talking about your strategy, tactical plans, and then all the training that could be done. Let's step away from that. I'd like to simplify the process. It is Friday afternoon, so if we could move on to the next slide, please. Let's start doing this. Let's talk about this today. Keep it simple, stupid. Let's reframe the narrative. There's a lot of conversations that I've been having in retirement living industry, the fear, the reluctance on the organisational level to make a start. The fear of presenting to community that all of a sudden we're trying to be dementia carers, that we are switching up what they invested in, what their lifestyle was all to be about in coming into retirement living. So rather than doing that, let's reframe this narrative and say, serving people with dementia is not the same as providing dementia care. If we head down some dementia care education roads, it's just good business. It doesn't mean that we're forcing people into dementia care communities. So at the crux of a lot of what we teach is person-centred communication. We actually underpin a lot of our training for professional carers with a communication model or a behaviours model. called caused, C-A-U-S-E-N-D. It's just good business if we treat everybody with mutual respect, get to know people better. We could rewrite this model. It's a Dementia Australia model for the care training, but we could rewrite that as a sales training tool. Communication. Am I saying what I need to be saying in a way that's understood? And am I listening properly to the person? Is the communication set up for success? Activity. What's going on at the time with that person? What am I doing? Am I giving them the attention? Am I stopping what I'm doing to give them enough attention to listen properly? Complaints. It's an unmet need. It could be they are unwell, but in a service environment, there's something that's wanted. There's something that's needed. What is it? We need to get to that. Story. Understanding people. Everybody's decisions in life and their behaviours can be driven by their own interpretation of their life and what their experiences are. So to know something about somebody, culture, religion, country of origin, English second language, there's a lot of complexities. And if we're not paying attention to somebody's story, particularly in a service industry, we could be missing something and missing the point completely. The environment. Am I trying to have a conversation? Am I trying to address something going on for somebody that needs help in the right place, the right time? Is it a hot sunny day? Is it glary? Is it noisy? Is it windy? All of those sorts of things. So we could step through this. If we do that in a service industry business, we'll get better service outcomes. So that's why it's good business. Dementia on the bottom. Of course, the more you know about dementia, the better you'll be in finding solutions for people who might be having conversations with you, wanting problems resolved. But you could replace that word dementia with other issues, other concerns that people may have or other conditions. So let's make a start that suits, something simple. My suggestion is to always start with staff education. If you don't walk the walk, if you don't understand, if you don't have the empathy, it's a little hard if you've got pressure coming in from residents, for example, who might know more than you. So I would suggest start there, but that doesn't have to be the case. On a Friday afternoon, I wouldn't mind if you printed this page out, put it on the wall, closed your eyes and threw a dart, because there is no bad starting point to address the concerns of mental acuity, decline, people's needs and dementia. The number one thing everybody's facing is fear of behaviours and life change. Whether we're serving those people, whether it's our family members, ourselves, whether it's us, that's a central fear. Keep that in mind. So you could start with staff education, resident education, community education, or environmental details, understanding those. Doesn't matter where you start, let's just make a start. Next slide, please. So I mentioned an environmental start. Sometimes it's good to have a little smile if we can, but common sense. Is it common these days? Not so sure. Environmental audits will provide you with a bit of an idea of whether your environment is suitable for people living with dementia. And if it's not about changing the environment. It's about a heads up on how you can go about your business in serving people and helping people, knowing where the trigger points might be, where the negatives might be, where the pain points might be. So what we need to make sure that we do is not assume that people see the world the same way we do. If we have that in mind every time, then we might be open to be able to help people in a different way that is less stressful for us and less stressful for them. So have an environmental audit of a village, if it's affordable, would give you a blueprint. It doesn't mean you have to signal to residents that you're heading down Dementia Care Road. It means you're preparing yourself to help people with mental acuity decline. Background noise, glare, wayfinding, particularly in environments where there's 100 doors, they're all the same colour. All pathways lead to more doors of the same colour. I don't have to have dementia to maybe forget where I live, and if I can't easily find it, I'm going to get frustrated. So just to know how the world may be perceived in your village for people living with dementia and mental acuity decline can be helpful. So if we press the button again there, Common sense. Mental acuity, dementia-related decline. Sometimes people just do take things extremely literally. Good conversations to understand for gardeners, for admin people. As silly as that looks, that was an example of an audit picture that was taken for a festival. So we don't take things for granted for people living with dementia. We need to just take a step back, take a breath, and maybe expect the unexpected at times. So if we move to the next slide, thank you. There we go. So there are a lot of tools. We won't go through them. We don't have the time. What I would like to do is be available for people to ask questions. Contact me later. We can send out more information. But the pathways that you can choose are varied. Some are cheaper than others. Some are free. Some are more effective. They will head you down a path that is positive in whichever way you start. But we need to make a start. And we can guide you on all of these sorts of tools, make it easy, and go from there. So that's all I had to say in this session. I hopefully saved a little bit of time because more questions would be important than me prattling on. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks indeed, Garry. That's great. And I think I've already got a whole lot of questions to ask you. But anyway, we'll get to you again in a few minutes. So at the moment, we're moving to some key senior members of Aveo, Natalie Patterson, who's the Chief Operation Officer, and Justine Hughes, the Chief Care Officer. So Natalie leads the operations team at Aveo and is passionate about the retirement sector and the role it plays in creating vibrant, supportive communities that empower residents to live independently for as long as possible. Justine currently leads the care team at Aveo, driving strategy and ensuring excellence in delivery of government-funded and privately paid care services to Aveo's retirement living residents. And we really wanted to have a very a large player in the retirement sector to present because we thought this is the best chance to understand maybe what is best practice and also what the major challenges might be when you've got a nationwide organisation. So over to you, Justine and Natalie.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We're going to do a bit of a team effort here. So we might just jump to the next slide. But as Elizabeth has mentioned, we're obviously representing Aveo, who are a retirement operator, but we also are a home care provider. And like all other operators and home care providers, our teams do navigate declining mental acuity each day. Our commitment, as Elizabeth said, is to enable residents to live independently for as long as possible. And we're very fortunate that we have an experienced operations and care team across our portfolio that enable us to do that. And as an approved home care provider, we do actually have an in-house clinical team and also a really strong network of allied health professionals that we can work with to navigate some of the challenges that occur in this particular area. Like the code, our approach with residents is really focused in the 3 key stages of residents moving into communities, living in communities, and then ultimately leaving communities. So I'll hand to Justine, who's going to step through a little bit about our approach at each of those stages.
Thanks, Natalie. And as Natalie said, we do focus on those 3 stages and moving in particularly. And we have a process at Aveo where the community team and the sales team do a pre-suitability assessment. So having conversations with families and resident or prospective residents, as to why they are looking to move into a retirement living village. And if there are any sort of red flags that might come up with regard to that conversation. We work really closely, particularly with the operations team, to upskill them in, feeling empowered to actually ask probing questions to really demonstrate, the why people are moving in. And that might be that, for instance, if there is a conversation and it might be the son or the daughter that's leading that conversation and the parent isn't actually doing a lot of the talking, that can be a concern as to why they're not actually able to or wanting to speak for themselves. So often we will work with those families to request a medical certificate or just to understand what might be happening behind the scenes there. I think it's really important. One thing we work really, really closely with the sales and the community team is for them to understand the extent of services that home care providers can deliver and what is actually available in that village at that time, so that there is very clear understanding at the beginning of moving in as to the extent of services that are available in that village. And with our diverse portfolio, those services can range from very little services to a full suite of services, but we want to make it very clear that we set the expectations with the family about the extent of services that we can practically deliver in that village through the life of the resident. And then when a resident moves in, lots of, through that life of their experience in the village, we have a team that are always, interacting and observing, particularly changes in behaviour or engagement with residents. And often a resident will move in very independent and active, engaging with others in the community. And we may then observe that there may be a change of life circumstance. A partner has passed away, the loss of a driving licence. And we're very fortunate with our case managers that are across our villages that we can then set up a meeting and introduce some services to them to continue to support their ongoing independence in the village. We very much, we work closely, the care team and the operations team, to monitor those behaviours. And, some of our best eyes and ears on the ground are actually the gardeners or the hairdressers that are in the village that have those weekly regular interactions that will then refer observations to both the community manager and the case manager. And we're able to then having had built up a relationship with the resident over their time in the village, be able to have some very sensitive conversations around those changes that are being observed and what we can do to support that ongoing independence and enablement. And then when, services may or may not be in place that we're aware of, but we often are observing where it is that point in the residents' life in the village that it is time for them to transition to a more suitable environment. And when we have that ongoing relationship, it really allows us to have very meaningful and often very positive, proactive conversations with families and with those residents and support a decision around a next move. We very much focus on the privacy of residents and maintaining that. And as we know in villages, residents are always looking out for each other, but it's really important that we are having those conversations in a very sensitive and respectful manner.
Thanks, Justine. We might get the next slide. Thanks, Deborah. So just, I guess what we thought we'd take some time just to talk about are some of the issues that we've encountered at each of these stages. And I'm sure for those of you in this webinar, some will be very familiar and you will no doubt have had your own experience. But obviously at the point of moving in, whilst we take steps to try and understand the suitability of residents to live independently, sometimes it can be challenging to pick up some behaviours or some pre-existing conditions that a resident might have. And what we have actually noticed, which I'm sure is not unique to us, as I guess there's the overarching housing crisis, the challenges with people being able to get beds in aged care communities, we are finding a high proportion of prospective residents who may not be able to live independently, and a higher care environment may actually be more suitable. And that is definitely something that we have seen an increase in over the last probably 12 months, but even the last 6 months. And that's where really just looking at the suitability of the community, of the home that the prospective resident and their family are looking at. And I think that can be quite a challenging, dynamic to try and navigate as sensitively as we can. We've had instances where families are really pushing for residents, their parents to come into a community. And then we've recently had one instance at a community where the daughter was actually looking to us to essentially reject her father coming into the community because she was already aware that he was living with dementia, and she was concerned about his ability to actually live independently, thought he needed a higher care environment, but she was looking for us to have that conversation as to, her having that conversation as well, which obviously, puts a lot of pressure on the team who are trying to look at what might be best for a prospective resident. We've also had an instance where we've gone through the process that Justine outlined, and we considered that a prospective resident was not suitable to live independently, not specifically because of concerns about their mental acuity, but other sort of pre-existing medical conditions. This poor gentleman was really struggling to find somewhere to live, was under pressure from the hospital where he had been for an extended period of time to move out, and really became quite fixated on moving into one of our communities, but was not willing to get some additional medical information that we requested. And we ultimately, with the assistance and support of an occupational therapist and our own team, made the decision that he really wasn't suitable to be living independently in that community. He then took steps to actually take us to the Human Rights Commission on the basis of discrimination, which I haven't encountered in my career in this sector previously. And that was obviously something that we were very concerned about, and obviously a really difficult set of circumstances to try and navigate when you could see just how desperate this gentleman was to find suitable accommodation. However, ultimately, because of the process that we had undertaken, the supporting documentation that we could provide, he ultimately did withdraw his claim. But I think that just sort of gives an indication of some of the challenges that we can be facing, particularly given some of the external factors. Once residents are moving into the community, I think one of the things that, we're particularly concerned about, which Garry alluded to, is the impact on staff of having residents living in the communities with changes in their mental acuity. I think that can obviously play out in behaviour that can be really challenging for the team to deal with, and at times inappropriate. And it's really a matter of what we can put in place to try and support the team as best we can so that they are informed and educated and able to identify circumstances and deal with the residents and their families as best as they can, but then also look at what we can do to support the families to really work through ultimately finding a better environment for them to live in. Because what we start to see, and again, I'm sure other operators have exactly the same experience, is the residents' behaviour may change, then starts to impact the experience that other residents have of living in their community. They're then looking to us as the operator to actually do something about it. They're really looking, their expectation is that if we can't control the residents' behaviour, then we should actually take steps to see them leave the community. That's obviously not always possible, but also not always something that, it's definitely not the first step that we want to take. But I think dealing with that dynamic of resident to resident behaviour, and it can, have a serious impact on both the team but also other residents, and can be really challenging to navigate, particularly if it's something that's being encountered, day in and day out. We have definitely seen an increase in what I would put down to a lack of tolerance from other residents, and we do get quite a bit of feedback from existing residents who question, why aren't the residents that are moving into the communities younger? Why are even things, if people are living in communities with the assistance of a walking frame or other aids or receiving care in their home, some residents actually see that as a cue that those fellow residents should actually not be living independently. So that's definitely something that I think even, probably since the end of, the COVID experience, we've really found an uptick in issues around that. And then finally, and Justine sort of talked to this earlier, but, at the point of leaving, obviously that can create a lot of issues, particularly, for families. I don't think anyone wants to put their family and loved ones into a higher care environment, but we really look at that and try and question ourselves whether a retirement independent community is the safest, most appropriate environment for a resident to be living in, and work with the families and their authorised representatives along those lines, and do what we can to support them to move into a higher care environment. But that's definitely, a really challenging things for the teams to navigate, for the families to navigate, and particularly at the moment with some where we've got families who are aligned, that residents do need to find an environment that's more suitable for their current circumstance. There are just no beds available. And so that's definitely an issue that, we're sort of encountering each and every day. I'll hand to you.
Okay.
Thanks, Deborah. Just the last slide.
Yes. So I think to Garry's point, we definitely see the key issue being, a lack of understanding and tolerance, as Natalie has said, particularly from other residents, and often denial from family members around the declining acuity of some residents. It's a very emotional issue to see your loved ones decline, to lose their independence, their ability, and we're very, very aware of that. But ultimately, our obligation is around making sure it's a safe environment, not just for that resident, but also for other residents in our communities. I think it's, there's been significant legislative changes and tribunal decisions making it very hard for operators to navigate some of these difficult situations, and we are, all operators are being faced with that. And, providing support and tools for community managers and team on the ground, just as Garry has said, to really understand, how we can provide environments that support people to live independently as long as possible. So yes, education and awareness is key. For us, strong relationships with residents, families and representatives that make a big difference to difficult conversations. The confidence to engage for our teams when behaviours changes are identified. How do we empower our teams to have a very challenging and difficult conversation with families and residents, and those relationships really make a difference. And then partnerships, vitally important, home care providers, community care providers, aged care placements, Dementia Australia.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, Justine and Natalie. Lots of interesting things that you said, and people on the chat are saying, yes, completely agree that, and they can relate to what you're saying. So I encourage anybody who wants to put any questions or comments in the chat. I think Craig and I will tackle first the question of moving into the village. I'll let him to have a question, but I'll start with a question, which is, and it just occurred to me as you were talking, as quite often people, at least my own parents were a case in point, one partner masks or supports the other partner who has declining acuity. And they seem to muddle on for quite a long time, okay. So I suppose both Garry and Aveo, what do you say about the facility or the opportunity for people to move in as partners? Would you be assessing each separate one and saying, oh, because one of you has failing acuity, they can't come in as a partner? What do you say about that?
Oh, definitely not. And I think it's really important to understand the support networks that both of the partners have. The support network for the person who has the diagnosis, but importantly, the support network for the caregiver. And I think that's where a retirement village environment creates additional support networks for both, and how fantastic is that we can offer that. So no, definitely not. It's not you bounce out because of it. It's actually, let's wrap our arms around them, but be very clear around how, the extent of the extent within which they can remain safely in the community. I think safely is really important. Like, we can put in and work with them, as Garry would know, with lots of technology support, lots of personal devices and things, but sometimes it just gets to a point where all of those support networks just aren't enough. And that's when the really difficult conversations need to be had.
Thanks. Garry, did you have a comment?
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I think it would be a tragedy to even consider asking people not to be with their partner and loved ones. We know that support at home is the way to go. We're all happier at home. It's where we want to be. And the people who know us best are the ones potentially best placed to initiate care. But we also know that there comes a time when you just have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help others. And that's the education piece that is so important for family carers as well. So in the retirement village environment, there is so much that people don't know they don't know. We need to cross that bridge, because it can be as simple as putting some signs on the cupboards, changing the decor a little bit to help both parties cohabit and have a much better quality of life for both sides. So absolutely.
I'm going to turn to Craig and let him ask a question, but I also noticed that he laughed when the point about some residents get annoyed that they want more younger people moving in. So he might have a comment as well as a question.
Yeah, I do. I point to your triangle, Garry, where you talk about staff education, resident education, community engagement. Quite frankly, a resident education, I think, is the most important of that. And as you've seen in the last survey from the Retirement Living Council, there's a greater proportion of people over 85 moving into retirement villages than younger people. And quite frankly, when you look at your statistics and say that the over 65, 10% are going to have dementia, etc., you work it out in a 300-person village, that means that 20 to 40 people are going to have dementia.
Yes.
And that's what you've got to expect. That's what you've got to tell people when they're moving in. And quite frankly, I think I agree with what Elizabeth is saying in terms of the partner, but also you've got to understand that the partner needs respite from this as well. And you can't rely on the staff. I'm sorry, but you can't. It has to be the community. And I make the point that why are there so many people over retirement moving into volunteers? They visit aged care homes and everything like that. Quite frankly, if you're moving into a retirement village, you're moving into village with people who are dying from cancer, dying from dementia, dying from whatever else. And I think you have to outline not a responsibility, but understand the commitment that is going to be needed from each of you as a resident for your neighbour and for themselves. So my question, basically, do you think the strategy, I'll talk to Natalie on this, do you think the strategy is to also include in future retirement villages respite or shared accommodation, shared rooms, shared accommodation for dementia patients?
It's interesting question. I guess as a business, our strategy is very much around independent living, and then supporting that with our home care business. Previously, we did own and operate residential aged care communities. However, we sort of made the decision to focus in, independent living and work with partners who have much bigger aged care platform, which works well for us. But I think that ideally you would have that co-located, and that's definitely what we look to try and do where we can. In terms of respite, we used to, when we sort of were more in the higher care space, we did do more respite than we do currently. But we will look at that if they are an existing resident, depending on what their needs are and the support that we are able to provide at that community, we will consider how best we can do that. In terms of more, I guess, group homes, that type of arrangement, that's definitely something that we have talked about as a leadership team. It's not something that we have in our portfolio at the moment, but I think we are all going to have to look at, what is the model moving forward and what are the best ways to keep people connected to their loved ones and to their communities for as long as possible. So I think it is something that, we'll all be giving more consideration. But at the moment, we don't have, group homes per se. We still do have serviced apartments at some of our communities, but not group homes.
Thank you.
I think probably the moment's come to move into the area of living in the village. And I'm going to be very brave here and say that from my perspective, I hear a lot about the residents and staff, and I know some really great things are happening, but I kind of perceive that there's this other factor, which is the family. I'm worried that the families, how, Garry, do you reach the families to help them understand what their own loved ones are going through? And also perhaps, is there an element of handballing on the part of families to villages inappropriately? What are all your fantastic resources do about how enabling operators to deal with families, which is, I think operators are reasonably confident usually dealing with residents, but I think families have got us all a bit foxed.
Look, and I agree 100% and on the same page with Craig. If we could move faster and address the we don't know what we don't know scenario with residents, we're going to automatically tap into families as well. However, skinning this cat for retirement living is as diverse as the people living with dementia. So we need to consider your regional cohort, where the facility is, what staff background the staff have. So we actually need to look at all the different components. It could be that somebody starts by tapping into their local Dementia Alliance and having conversations. Maybe it can be reframed as in that the people within the village might not be the people living with dementia. It might be their family has dementia. So therefore, the dementia is on the outside of the village and not on the inside of the village. But somebody living in the village might want some assistance in helping. So there are so many avenues we can approach this with. But to reach the community, you've got dementia alliances. We have community education. It's great for brand to sponsor a community education workshop, and so happens we'll probably end up with residents in that same workshop learning at the same time as well. Advocates, having advocates come and speak. And other organisation collaborations. There's lots of businesses out there that are wanting to do better, be better, that are not dementia care organisations, such as councils, libraries, art galleries, festivals. We're doing work with a whole myriad of people who understand that if you're facing community, you're facing people living with dementia. You need to understand that and work with that. So there's lots of different things you can do to reach into community without making an enormous commitment internally as well. So I don't know if that helps answer that question or not, but talking to us about your local area as to what resources might exist in your local area is important.
I'm going to sort of ask Craig for a comment as well, and he might direct further questions back to Aveo. But the question of declining acuity in villages was also on my mind, because I sort of have a probably uninformed view, but that the younger and on the ball residents also drive a lot of self-help, engagement activities. I mean, I think the model was that the residents themselves would generate a whole lot of activities and interests, perhaps supported by staff. What happens, Craig? Do people who are losing acuity, are they still active and exciting and energetic, but just forgetful, or does it have an impact on their willingness to think about budgets and get involved?
Quite frankly, declining, well, if I can put it as cognitive decline, which being in my late 70s, I know a lot about. Quite frankly, they are not. I'll give you an example. We have exercise classes in our village. Okay, we got some new people coming in. One has got Alzheimer's, partner hasn't. Late 80s, fine. Get exercise classes, and you've got a group of 80-year-old ladies and some men going around in exercise classes. They're coming on their walkers and everything. And you take this person in who's got Alzheimer's, he feels right at home because, quite frankly, everyone is having a great time. And I think that's the atmosphere and the environment that you need to do. You need to introduce that because we're all getting older. And quite frankly, we all have some incapacities. And I think that the ability to include people with declining mental acuity is it's unbounded, quite frankly. That you don't have to have exercise classes. You can just talk to other people and say, well, maybe you'd like to sit with this guy for half an hour or something like that. But people, as is pointed out by Garry, people with dementia want to be included.
Yeah.
That's the basic thing. And that's what you need to do.
Yeah, say a bit more about that, Natalie or Justine.
Oh, I was just in hearing that, I think definitely, I think we would all hope that, well, all communities, but in particular retirement communities are inclusive. And I would also, I would love it if they were all built on the foundation of kindness, care and respect. And I think the majority of them are, but there'll be good days and bad days and times where that's easier and times when that's harder. But I know in our experience, we can have some young 65-year-olds who have, mental cognitive issues. And then, we've got some residents who are over 100 who are as sharp as anything. And so I think it's also just about understanding that, it does affect everyone differently. The behaviours might be different in different people at different times of the day. And it's a really difficult thing to manage. And I think just coming back to the earlier question, if I can, Elizabeth, just around family, we definitely think about family as a key stakeholder, which sounds very business centric, but really think about they are a really key part of residents. But equally you'll have residents who are coming in independent and they don't want their children involved, and then their circumstances change, and then obviously we do what we can to get them involved, but they're still private and living their own lives. But some of the most challenging circumstances for us are where family or where residents are actually no longer connected with their families. And when there are challenges, it can really be one of the most challenging but also most heartbreaking things to try and navigate, where you have a resident who is either, no longer in touch with their family or they don't have family. And I think that's where it's really difficult. And that's probably the most challenging.
And most challenging, particularly when their needs are increasing and, there's nobody but the local GP that has a relationship outside of the village with them. And then, the potential of having to get involved with government agencies to make sure that that person's both financial and health matters are being supported. We're seeing a lot more of that. I think the other area that we're seeing are people moving into the villages that have complex mental health disorders. and the behaviours that go with that, so that they may have been managing and continue to manage, but sometimes not. And I think that that's an area we've definitely, I think, seen in the last few years an increase in younger residents moving in, sort of over 65 with very complex mental health challenges. And now residing in the village. I think that's just a new frontier for many operators as well.
Yeah, and I think it just reinforces, based on my experience, what an amazing job the community managers and the teams on the ground do every day to try and support residents to, live independently and have, the best life that they can at the stage that they're at. And so, yeah, just big shout out to them, because I know it's really, really challenging.
So, one of the questions in the chat box concerns a retirement village where the residents, if they are frail and falling over, don't want to call an ambulance and don't want to tell their families. I'm interested in talking to Garry about small retirement villages, perhaps with very few staff. Would your resources and your staff training help people in that circumstance to, perhaps surface the issues and have other people, perhaps in Dementia Australia or otherwise, to chat over what you do?
Yeah, the communication piece, just starting the conversation and making it okay to talk about dementia. Craig mentioned and Justine has mentioned the fact that we can accept conversations around other morbidities. We need to accept conversations around dementia and not be afraid of it. And it's all driven by, we don't know what we don't know. Mum had dementia, she did this behaviour, I don't want to mention it, I don't want to face it, I don't want to talk about it. Dad's got dementia, is it going to be exactly the same or not? Those are the sorts of things. Our resources, we've got a free 24/7 helpline. That's for any conversation, for any question, for whether it be staff, whether it people living with dementia, and it is very common for people not to want to be diagnosed. Sometimes it's a conscious choice because they might know that they've got it or getting it, so they just want to take day by day and seek quality of life. Other people, we would like to encourage diagnosis because we could provide assistance. There's medication in some cases, those sorts of things. So it is important to talk about it and be diagnosed, but the fear is very real. People don't want to face or don't want to hear that it might be that's causing it. So, but other conversations in those environments is to just check that environment. Is it a falls risk environment, for example? We look at things for wheelchair access, for example, that's common in community, but we don't look at things because we don't know how to look at things through a dementia lens and a mental acuity lens necessarily. So that's glare, that's wayfinding, that's colour contrast, that's shadows, that's all those sorts of things. There is things we can do.
I also then want to move on to a slight elephant in the room, or it's in my mind perhaps, and that is leaving the village. So I talk to lots of retirement village operators and I hear what you're saying, Garry, and maybe in some life someone might think that you might be opposed to ever saying people move out of villages. I think there's a perception amongst some retirement village operators that because the government is talking about living in place, that perhaps no one should ever leave a retirement village. But on the other hand, I don't think that's very sound. So perhaps I'll direct my first question to reaction about that to Aveo. The question of, you have to go to the tribunal and get an order or get guardianship or make sure that there's an enduring power of attorney. It must be extremely difficult, or have I got that wrong? Can you smooth the path?
I don't think we can necessarily always smooth the path, but we can most definitely preempt and be proactive. So I think most definitely enduring powers of attorney, all of those documents are things that we talk about at entry, but often more often when we're engaging around, interest in signing up to my aged care and home care package. That's really the important, and that can often be the introduction around estate planning and planning for the future, to have those conversations. I think I saw someone in the chat popped up about the, the fear of moving to residential aged care. And I think that they've, pre the Royal Commission, lots of terrible practices, post Royal Commission, significant improvement. And I know that we have relationships with many residential aged care providers. And often what we find is, we are so relieved mum and or dad moved there because we don't have to worry. It's much better than we thought. How fantastic. So, it's definitely breaking down that conception that moving to residential aged care is going to be a very terrible experience, because we've had feedback that it's been an experience that's been very positive because they've had the support in place that they weren't having, or able to get in their own homes.
I think the only thing I'd add, sorry, Elizabeth, is we have seen a few, on the assumption that we've got all those things in place and we do have relationships with family, or the family acknowledge that, it is time for someone to move. The thing that's coming up a little bit now we're finding is just the financial capacity for families and residents to be able to make that move. And that is probably where, we're getting more, I guess, requests for assistance. What can we do to support them, just sort of enable that transition as well? And I think the financial thing is very stressful for families too. So I think they're just some of the things as well. Yeah.
I was just wondering whether Craig has a comment from the perspective of the RVRA, the transition from retirement villages to aged care or through the tribunal. Would you get asked about that frequently or not?
We have discussions about it, yes, and we do get asked about it in terms of what can we do. And it's something we work with we're trying to work with the operators and the government to say, look, it's practically impossible to get anyone out of a retirement village. Forget about it under the current legislation. And I think that's why, I'll use your word, Garry, inescapable. Quite frankly, the government has passed the buck to retirement villages. You are not going to have enough aged care beds and dementia care wards or anything like that in the next 20 years to cope with the population. You are not going to have the hospital beds to cope with the population that you can't look after. Quite frankly, you've got to find a middle ground, and I think that is, and as Garry said, it's good businesses. Could be good business as well, in terms to open up your areas to more care not care at home, but more care for people who just cannot live independently or cannot live with the current carer they do have. I'm sorry, it's a strategic. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I don't think I've answered your question quite properly, but I think we get a lot of inquiries about it. And how can they, financial queries, families coming up to us and saying, how can we find somewhere where the manager is obviously not looking after our parents? I mean, basically, they have no idea what to do with our parents. So what can we do to force them to look after us, or to basically, I don't know how. And I really just sympathise with the operators in this case.
Yes. So there's quite a few questions about duty of care, but I'm just going to give the opportunity to Garry in conclusion to just say a bit more about the resources that Dementia Australia has available. And I think, Garry, you and I were talking that it might be a perception that, yes, okay, Aveo or Lavonde or whatever, Caton, they have all these wonderful staff that we can see, but what if we are a small village? So I just want to go back to that issue. You assured me that there are an awful lot of resources. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Are you on mute?
Sorry about that. Our website is an ideal starting point, but there is a lot there. So please don't be afraid to send an email, to phone the helpline with any sort of conversation. But there's a lot of free resources. There's dementia education tools such as Ask Annie, which is a mobile phone app, but there's ways to use them. So we don't want people just to be heading down pathways and then getting stuck. So talk to us all the time about where it is that you want to head, and we can guide you on that. Using some of our tools works really well for some teams, but not for other teams. So we can help unpick that as well. In terms of, Craig's 100% right. If we could crack through the stigma and discrimination piece with residents, we are halfway there already just with that. But then what we've also got to be mindful of is that staff education. So if they're caught off guard by residents who start to put pressure on, you know, Barry's walking, he's knocking on my door at 2 in the morning, what do I do with that? You need to get him out of the village, those sorts of things. Staff need to be able to work through that conversation to know what to do with that. It could, you know, Edna says, look, the guy that I know he's spying on me and he's stealing my laundry every day. How do you navigate that question or that topic? You know, somebody is just trying to push me out of the village all the time, and I know the government's after me as well. So you know, what do you do with those sorts of things? All the way down to there's a pink elephant on a motorbike sitting out there. Okay, how do you say? You know, learning how to deal with those situations is really important. There's lots of free information, mobile phone apps, website toolboxes that we've got, but talk to us and we can guide you then on what tools might best suit you and your team and your resident cohort, because they're all different. Every person's journey with dementia is different. So therefore all your care environments or potential care environments need to be different to accommodate as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring the session to an end. We have had an awful lot of people have joined us, and also the recording is going out. So I really warmly thank Garry, Justine, Natalie and Craig for joining me on this webinar. I want to make a comment about the Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct uses the organisational principle of moving in, living in the village and moving out, which is we've used today. But of course it begins by a whole set of principles, and including transparency and respect. But also there's a key obligation about training. And I suppose we feel on this webinar that it's about talking and surfacing the issues, thinking about the scenarios, planning ahead for what can happen, and not, if you like, putting your head in the sand. That will be the start to solving these problems. People have asked really good questions in the chat about where the duty of care starts and stops, where the obligation to look after the residents starts and stops, whether the bottom line will dictate the answers. But I suppose our message is that thinking about the issues and getting them on the table and talking about them and seeing what other people are doing about them, that can always be a really great and positive thing. So if you want to know more about the Code of Conduct, you can access more information about the code, including getting a free downloadable copy. Go to www.awisemove.com.au. And lastly, you want to thank Deborah McDonald, the administrator, and all the gang behind the scenes that made this webinar go so smoothly. Thanks again to our presenters most warmly for your great insights. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.